Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here for today's session, Essential Skills for Group Dialogue, Understanding What's Happening and What to Do in the Moment. My name is Haley Miller. I'm an MSW candidate at Salisbury University, and I'm an intern with Peace Through Action here.
And my name is Chris Wolonsky, and I serve as the Director of Programs here. I'm grateful you've chosen to spend this time with us this evening, and together, Haley and I are going to guide you through today's session. So tonight we're going to focus on how to recognize what's happening in group conversations and respond in a way that helps you move them forward.
Next, as the organizational host for today's session, we'd like to briefly introduce Peace Through Action USA's mission. Peace Through Action USA inspires and equips everyday people to increase safety, belonging, and peace in their relationships and communities. They accomplish this by cultivating their compassion and strengthening their constructive communication and conflict resolution skills. Today's session is a part of our effort to help build people towards a more productive group conversation in everyday life. We would just like to take a moment also to thank our strategic partners. We're especially grateful to Broadview Church for making this event possible tonight. As supporters in our work, we are profoundly grateful for their vision, dedication, commitment to the pursuit of peace. Broadview Church's support in our work also includes being a local partner in our Community Peace Project concept in Calvert County, Maryland. From those joining from Calvert County, we look forward to staying connected with you through newsletters and social media updates. We have exciting things coming with new opportunities to engage, learn, and take action, so stay tuned. And be on the lookout for our Summer of Service program that guides youth within a week-long leadership development experience through community service.
It's a really exciting program that we have going on this summer.
Tonight, we're going to start with a short activity to observe group conversation. Then we'll introduce a small tool to understand what's happening inside those conversations. Then we're going to walk through some examples and identify key dynamics. Then we're going to navigate learning of some practical ways to respond and support conversations and practice skills together through guided and applied activities, and then close with a reflection and following steps to stay connected. Before we move into content, let's take a moment to ground ourselves to get a sense of how everyone is arriving here tonight. If you haven't already, I encourage you to put your name in the chat, where you're joining from, and then one word that describes how participating in group dialogue or group conversations usually makes you feel. Open, great. Love that. Energized. Group conversations can feel different depending on the situation that's involved, who's involved, what's at stake. A lot of the times, if it's a formal conversation or some, informal conversations, yeah, anxious, nervous. Some people can feel comfortable speaking up, others tend to hold back. Some conversations can feel productive, while others can feel tense and unclear. And then tonight, we're just going to build a simple way to understand kind of what's happening and respond in those moments constructively. They can happen very quickly a lot of the time. And so it can be tricky knowing how to kind of navigate that. All right. Like I said, my name is Haley Miller. My pronouns are she, her. I am an MSW candidate at Salisbury University through the Graduate School of Social Work and interning here with Peace Through Action. My work here focuses mainly on community engagement and practical skills for constructive conversations. And I am also, with me graduating next month, this will also be my last virtual learning event, and my time here with Peace for Action is coming to an end, but I look forward to, I'm planning on staying connected. I love the work that the organization has done, and I've just learned so much through my work with them. So I'm looking forward to staying connected through that. There are other ways of engagement. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're really grateful to have you with us, Haley, and thank you for all you've done with our organization. And yeah, we're just really excited to celebrate your time with us with this learning event and you taking on this facilitative role. We're really grateful to have you with us. So I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Chris Wolanski. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the Director of Programs and Partnerships for Peace Through Action USA. I'm a career-long educator, and I've been involved in nonprofit work both domestically and abroad, um, really throughout my adult life. In my personal time, I'm a spoken word poet, National Poetry Slam champion, and I hold a master's degree in communication and oral storytelling. Tonight, Haley and I are really looking forward to working through these ideas and concepts related to group dialogue with you. And we just are grateful to have you with us as well.
All right. So, getting into why this conversation matters today. Most people try to improve conversations a lot of the time by being so fixated on saying the right thing, and that can feel very intimidating. And I think a lot of times when you're trying to focus on saying the right thing, things can kind of be left unsaid sometimes. And so often in group settings, what shapes the conversation is much bigger than just one comment, even though in the moment it's much easier said than done not to worry about the weight that one comment might land or something, but a lot of times it's much bigger than that. They can become tense, unclear, and dominated by certain voices. When you get a lot of people in the mix, sometimes it's easy for a sum of few in the group to kind of dominate over people. And so people might hold back or disengage, talk past one another. And a lot of times people want to help move the conversation forward, but we're kind of stuck in a situation where we don't know how. And like I said before, they're happening in quick moments. And so some of us aren't equipped with the skills and tools to know what to do in those moments and know exactly how to fix a tense situation or an unclear situation in an effective way. The core skills we'll be going over is kind of just noticing what's happening, deciding what matters most, and then based on what we decide matters most, making one useful tool to move that conversation forward. So as we go through this event, I just encourage you to kind of reflect on times in your own experiences where group conversations may have been gone differently if using these tools, or may a group conversation might have been useful, a group dialogue might have been useful to help move a situation along. I encourage you to just keep that in the back of your mind. All right, so let's start by looking at a short example of a group conversation. Just take a moment to kind of look at this image. If anything feels off, familiar, any responses that shock you or don't shock you, maybe. If you could just type one word or a short phrase into this chat to describe what stands out for you. And then I'm going to let you know when to hit send. We're going to do like a chat waterfall. It can be something about the tone of response, what people are doing, just kind of what first comes to your reaction. Type it, but don't hit send. And then I'll do like a countdown in a 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1, send. Chaos, dominance. Yeah. One thing that stuck out to me was like, I'm not interested. The immediate, no one is listening. Yes. Everyone is focused inward. Yes. A lot of times that's interesting. I think when we see kind of group conversations fall like this, I think that a lot of times it's that a lot of people are focusing inward and forgetting that we're here as a collective. Yeah, so even in one moment, a lot is happening. Different people can experience the same moment differently, which correlates right with real conversations that can happen quickly. And instead of finding the perfect response to fix the whole conversation, first we're just going to step back and kind of just notice what's going on. Reading the room. So before we try to fix the moment, try to slow it down. And so every group conversation has 3 things. We're going to call them heat, direction, and space. Heat is the emotional intensity of a conversation. If people are yelling at each other, interrupting each other, talking over one another, a lot of times your body can kind of tell you when the heat is off. You might feel a little bit of like a pit in your stomach, you might feel flushed, your hands might get a little clammy. That's a sign to that heat is being affected in that dialogue. Then direction, this is where the conversation is trying to do or where it's going. So you might ask yourself, is a group trying to understand, debate something, solve, or win an argument? And sometimes the goal changes. A lot of times we see when direction is the issue that we want to kind of focus on, or kind of what we want to tackle first when we're trying to move the conversation to a productive place. We might often see that we came to this group dialogue with one outcome or one collective goal in mind, but then that shifted. And I think all of us can probably think back to a time where we are in the middle of a conversation and then it just like dawns on us like, wait, this isn't even why we're here, or how did we get on this topic, or things of that nature. So if those are the feelings that you're getting, then that's a pretty good indicator that maybe direction is what's going on in the conversation and what's happening. And then the last one, space. That's just participating, kind of asking who's speaking, who's not speaking. If the conversation is balanced, is it dominated by certain voices, or is anyone being left out? Something else that's important to note is that it's also important to acknowledge the norms of the group if they're known. Like some participants might just feel uncomfortable participating as other participants feel more comfortable participating. And so in those instances, you might want to honor that, and of course encourage them to have the platform if that's something that they want to do, and to give their intake and to give their impression on the dialogue, but of course not force them to or push them. But it's when you see and notice people are trying to respond or trying to give back into the conversation, and that space is being taken away from them due to overpowerment or domination. And you can't really focus, it's hard to focus on all three at once. So it helps to name one that you notice first, whether that's the first one that you notice, whether, with the heat, direction, or space, whatever you pick up on needing attention initially, focus there. And then it can help you move to then kind of what to do, rather than, of course, in a conversation, you might want to give someone time to speak, have everyone lower their voices, and make sure that the goal is being recentered and restated. But a lot of times it's just difficult to deal with all of those at once. Okay, so going back to the image that we used earlier, now that we kind of looked at these lenses, let's take a moment and just notice what's standing out to you now. If you guys could just in the chat respond to either what's happening with heat, direction, or tone, just pick one, whichever one you picked up on first or you found the most interesting. It's hot. Yes, yes, I agree. Going nowhere. Yes, absolutely. That's interesting too, kind of like when you just feel like the dialogue is just not really getting anywhere. People who disagree won't say so. Yes, yep. This is the skill in action. You're taking a fast moment and you're kind of slowing it down, and then you're deciding what matters most. And then once you decide that, like I said, it's much easier to get a plan of action once you're able to identify one focal spot that needs addressing, that maybe could make the conversation reach the end goal that it was intended to reach. A couple of overbearing people. Yes. Um, okay. So once you decide most, we're going to choose how to respond. There's three skills that we're going to give you today: regulation, reorient, and redistribute. So regulation kind of matches with heat. So it lowers the emotional intensity. Something that one might say is, let's slow this down for a second. Yeah, just trying to kind of bring everyone back to like another example that I was thinking about a little bit earlier was maybe if someone's like, can we take 5 and come back? Re-regulate your kind of nervous system there. That would be an example of regulation. And then reorient is another one. So this kind of just shifts what the conversation is trying to accomplish, kind of regrounding. Like I said, one example is, can we focus on trying to understand each other? Another one might be just kind of reminding the group of the initial agenda of the meeting and the initial reasoning of the covenant. And then redistribute just shifts who's participating. So I would like to hear from someone who hasn't spoken yet. kind of brings those other voices into the room and allows people to feel heard. Maybe if you are comfortable in the group and you know this isn't going to make someone uncomfortable and names, you might ask them directly, like, hey, so and so, how do you think of that? Might be another example. These are short, simple moves. They can make one small adjustment, and then once you choose what move that fits what's happening, it's important that you aren't focused directly on trying to fix the whole conversation at hand. Once you kind of pick a move, just focus on then directing it back to whether it's the space, heat, or direction that you're connecting it to. Okay, so looking at this image one more time, I'm going to give you guys a sample response, and then I'm going to ask you guys to rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. So 1, it doesn't help at all. 2, it helps a little bit. 3, it's somewhat helpful. And 4, it does help move the conversation. And 5, it's very, very helpful. So the response is, let's pause for a second. I'm noticing people are starting to talk over each other. So take a moment to think about this response and how it correlates with the example image that we've been working with, and give it a rating for me in the chat. So let's pause for a second. I'm noticing people are starting to talk over each other. 4, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so this response is kind of focusing on direction. They're noticing that the conversation is alleviating its course and kind of going off track a little bit, and they're trying to recenter it. So it helps reorient the conversation, re-anchors everyone into intention. And then, is there any ways that you guys can think of that could make this response better for this scenario? Whether you guys want to say it aloud or in the chat. When I first kind of heard this, the circle process. Yeah, when I first heard this reaction, I think I thought it was interesting because I think, kind of like what I was saying earlier, a lot of other factors come to place. Many people might take this very differently than others. Because I'm an action item beyond thinking, like write down one thing that brings you here today. Yeah, I love that. I love that. That also kind of gives them a moment to step away, you know, recenter in that way, if that's how they process. Yeah, so even a simple move can shift what's happening when it matches the conversation that it needs, for sure, definitely. And with that being said, group dialogue doesn't work for every situation. Group dialogue works best when people are willing to engage. There's enough safety for people to speak, and the goal is to understand and not necessarily to win one over, to try to prove your point. Dialogue becomes harder, might not necessarily be the right answer when people are not engaging in good faith. The goal is to win or dominate, or when harm is actively happening and something else may be needed, like setting a boundary or pausing or stopping the conversation, addressing harmful behavior directly, or maybe involving someone with more authority if that's what it takes. So the key question to just kind of keep in mind always is this a moment for dialogue? Is this a moment that dialogue could help us reach a common goal, or does something else need to happen first for that to happen? Dialogue could still happen, but is something maybe needed to transpire before then? So we are going to practice all 3 parts of this skill next. Okay, so as we shift into guided practice, this is where we're going to apply everything that we've discussed so far. So there's going to be three parts of the guided practice. The first part is going to be reading the room and then choosing a move, and then we're going to check the fit of the dialogue. So reading the room is where we're going to explain kind of or try to navigate what's happening in the conversation and figuring out what we notice. Choosing a move, we're going to decide how to respond, kind of that regulate, reorient, and redistribute. And then we're going to check the fit and ask ourselves whether dialogue is the right approach here or if something else is needed. Again, the goal is to not get it perfect. It's just to slow the moment down, make one clear decision that leads us to a practical move that we can use to help the conversation. Okay. So scenario one. So we're just noticing it here. We're not solving it yet. We're just seeing what kind of comes up for us. A school district is holding a public meeting about whether to remove certain books from school libraries. Some community meetings argue that books are inappropriate for students. Others argue that removing them restricts access and targets certain identities. As the conversation unfolds, a few speakers begin raising their voices and interrupting each other. Several participants repeat the same points without responding to what others are saying. A handful of people are speaking frequently, while others, especially students and newer attendees, have stopped trying to contribute. So just take a moment and think about what's happening in this conversation. Any dynamic that sticks out to you. What you notice. And I encourage if you want to say it aloud if anyone wants to speak or in the chat as well is always encouraged. Lack of leadership. Chaos, high temperature. Absolutely. It's heated. Some retreat while others dominate. Yeah, so absolutely. It's not a dialogue, it's a free space. It's interesting. I definitely think I don't anytime kind of raised voices is such an indicator of heat for me. It's kind of one of the main ones that I go back on. So when it says that, that's where my head goes to. Likely drawn from compassion from everyone responding in the room. Noisy space. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then like I said, what you kind of choose to focus on tends to shape what you do next. Let's try another one. So still just kind of reading the room, noticing what's coming up for you. A family is trying to decide whether their grandmother should move into a nursing home. As the conversation unfolds, one family member becomes visibly emotional and says, "We can't keep doing this. It's not safe anymore." Another responds sharply, saying, "You're just trying to make this easier for yourself." The conversation shifts into defending positions rather than exploring options. One sibling hasn't spoken at all, despite being the primary caregiver. So again, just kind of what seems to stick out to you, any heat, direction, or space. No one's getting their message across. Absolutely. I think this is kind of another one where it seems like everyone is kind of thinking about, you know, inward a little bit, maybe. Safety is always a concern. Yeah. The outcome, absolutely. Yep. Space, who's participating clearly. Yep. I think I would definitely choose to probably focus on space here, especially like it was said, being the primary caregiver seems to not be responding or super involved in the conversation. It's interesting given that they might have a good bit of input to put in. So that's definitely probably where I would go with that as well. Yeah. And it's interesting because, seeing how people are focusing on different things and there aren't any right or wrong answers. And it's like I said, just kind of one where you're choosing to focus on and then look at the first thing you're kind of deciding to tackle. And then, like I said, you're going to take that choice and it helps you guide into the next decision that you make. I think a lot of times, whenever, at least for me, when I break things down into something tangible and holdable, and I can be like, okay, this is heat's happening in this, or rather than just feeling frazzled in general by a group conversation. Once I'm given those tools, it's kind of easier to then approach that next step with more intention a little bit. So once you're able to narrow that down, I think it provides that. So in this, yeah. So now we're going to build on noticing, and we're adding the next step, how to respond. So in this scenario, housemates are discussing shared responsibilities in a weekly meeting. And as the conversation unfolds, one person says, "I'm always the one cleaning up after everyone." Another interrupts and says, "That's not true, you're exaggerating." The tone becomes defensive and voices begin to rise. The conversation shifts towards proving who is right rather than solving the issue. Two housemates remain quiet and disengaged, even though the issue affects them. So again, just kind of take a moment to reflect here on what's happening, what seems to matter most here. So kind of to yourselves and individually think on that heat, direction, and space. And then based on that, would you try to regulate, reorient, or redistribute? Remember, regulate, lowering the intensity, kind of navigating that heat aspect, that heat dynamic. Reorienting is shifting the focus, recentering it back to the initial goal. And then redistributing is making sure that everyone has space to speak, provide space for all to speak and be heard. Yes, avoid statements black and white. Reorient. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I kind of found myself asking, kind of what was the goal here, which kind of, like I said, is always an indicator of that direction, that reorient. Right. So the two quiet ones to chime in, ask the interrupter how responsibilities are shared. That's always, yes, that's always interesting to kind of turn it and ask, like, well, what's your perspective? Kind of challenge that. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Right.
just want to add that that's an interesting way to add space is to allow, that new voice to enter the picture where it's like, oh wait, now this is a three-person conversation. Um,
Hmm.
it's always a cool way to mix it up a little bit.
And I love hearing that. There's so many, there's a bunch of generic ways that it's easier said than done to be like, let's hear from someone who hasn't spoken yet, or but yeah, that is a good way to kind of to do that. To Okay, so we're going to try one more for the second part of this guided practice. Same process, just kind of noticing what's happening, choosing a main focus and responding. In this scenario, parents and grandparents are discussing how a young child should be raised. And as the conversation is unfolding, a grandparent makes a passive aggressive conversation saying, well, in our day, kids didn't dress like that. One parent responds defensively, that's not your decision to make. The tone becomes tense with subtle jabs and interruptions. The conversation shifts towards defending parenting styles rather than understanding each other. And one family member tries to change the subject but is ignored. So again, just kind of take a moment to think about what's happening here, reflect what seems to matter most, and then kind of what move you would take based on that. Again, just kind of the regulate, lowering the emotional intensity, reorient, distribute. Regulate, then reorient.
Yeah, that's interesting, Alan, how you suggested it in a sequence. That's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting thought that, maybe there's one that you lead with and it helps lead you to the next one.
Mm-hmm. Are there any kind of interested? Are there any kind of like indicators that you guys are picking up on that would steer you towards like orient or regulate or because like for me what like when the well in our day kids didn't dress like that kind of says to me like well is that why we're here what I that kind of is the indicator to me in this scenario. But how
Yeah, I think Kathy
what could
asked a great question, and
yeah
I
that is great.
think we should maybe open that up to the group. To reorient or regulate, how would what do you feel inclined to say? And then maybe we'll kind of take stock of some strategies as a group that we all sort of intuitively have.
Ask everyone whether they
Yeah, great.
I would, maybe ask the grandparent what it is that they object to. I don't know.
Yeah, this is a tough one. This one came out of Haley and I's both shared experience. I brought it up and she was like,
Oh,
yeah, I've seen this too. And I'm like, I'm not really sure how it hasn't resolved, at least in what I've witnessed. So I haven't seen that successfully play out. So a lot of this is speculation, but yeah, that's a good suggestion, Kathy.
I don't know. Because anything you say, the parent, it's the parent's business, not the grandparent. So how do you draw that boundary and
Right.
without
Yeah.
without anger and
Hmm.
resentment and
Yeah, true. True. And that's a really good point. And this is a component of, I guess, space and
mhm.
how, one might think about it as sometimes a conversation, it might lend itself in such a way that one person is talking more in that conversation and it might just be that they probably should, you know. So there are times where, people just conversations are skewed in certain ways where people have different stakes and different levels of investment and engagement and or the ways in which a certain issue might affect them might be more direct, you know. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, ask everyone why they're there. Depends on whether this is a general discussion or relating to a particular circumstance. Yeah. Hoping they remember to think of the child first. Yeah, that's great. That's a great reorientation, I think. To Okay, well, and this is something we've noticed a lot in our group dialogue stuff is how can we, like, what is the shared value? The shared cause we have is to bring, you know, baby Jessica out of the well. We all care about making that happen, right? So, we share that core value. We might have these other things that surround that, but we're arguing over book banning right now because we both care about kids, or this bathing suit thing is ultimately, you care about her expression, I care about like the impressions that she's leaving in to to her peers or whatever. And so ultimately it's both in service of the same common shared um, you know, intersection of the Venn diagram there. So that's a great observation, Stephanie.
Yeah, I think I also find that identifying that shared humanity kind of a lot of times can help recenter something back to, you know what I mean? And it's like, right, we are both ultimately arguing because we care so much, like, like, or whether it's about the team meeting or whatever you may have it, give each their opportunity to speak, then to focus on what is common to both. Maybe think of the issues. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think this is can often be one of those classic times where it's like you're arguing about the thing, but it's not about the thing.
Hmm.
Anyone who's been through a breakup knows, you know, well, we were arguing about this thing, but it wasn't about that thing. It was because, there's this bigger, larger thing at work. And that might be a good time to reorient, and say, maybe what's going on here is we're kind of struggling with our roles. And maybe it's like it's not about the bathing suit right now. Right now it's about the bathing suit, but it's actually about the fact that, you know, Nana is a stepmom who's never had a kid before, and she's navigating what parenthood looks like for what that looks like in her grandmother role. And meanwhile, young mother lost her mom and doesn't really have a model for, so I'm just speculating and drawing out a very long, rather personal example. But, so each person has their own kind of thing they're bringing to that picture. And so maybe this situation could be reoriented in such a way where it's like, let's just talk about, beyond the bathing suit. It might just it might just mean that another conversation has to happen first. Yeah, and great suggestion, Stephanie. That's the messy question, right? Is like negotiating who should and shouldn't have a voice in that picture. So yeah, space is really you're right. That's like kind of the crux of this is how much space should we allow and how do you navigate putting that together there? Do you have thoughts on how you might navigate that? Not to call on you directly or anything, but if anyone has any thoughts, feel free.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, good point, Kathy. There's cultural layers there. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. Why are the grandparents included? That might be one hard thing where, maybe the grandparents are taking on a role that, you know, they're caretaking in a certain way and they're
Mhm.
trying to navigate the boundaries there. Yeah, it's great. Shall we? All right. Let's move on to the next one.
All right. So now getting into the third part. So we're going to zoom out kind of and ask ourselves here, like I said, now that we've looked into the conversation and noticed what's happening in it and how to approach that, we're going to zoom out and talk about, is dialogue even the right approach for some scenarios? Before answering that question, it's good to kind of consider, are people able to get engaged safely? Is the goal of understanding, or is it to win? Is harm actively happening? So in this scenario for this slide, an employee is told by a supervisor that they cannot wear a hijab at work. As the situation unfolds, the decision is presented as a rule, not a discussion. The employee is not being invited into a conversation. The situation involves potential discrimination and unequal power. So take a moment to think about this situation. Would a group dialogue to achieve an outcome work here for it? Would it be the right approach to it?
You
It's
guys would
good.
all make great coworkers.
I know, right? Yeah, so in situations like this, something else might be needed first, right? So examples might be, say, addressing the discrimination directly involving HR leadership, like was said by Alan, or following a reporting or a legal process. So again, like this scenario was kind of set out to show you, is not every scenario or situation is going to be receptive and productive by having a dialogue, conversation, situation. So part of the skill that we're learning tonight is also knowing what's going on in the dialogue and how to intentionally approach it, but also at the basis level, knowing when group dialogue can be constructive and when it can't be. Mixture of heat and direction. Yeah,
Yeah, that's great.
absolutely. Okay. All right. So in this scenario, a town is deciding whether to approve the construction for a large data center. As the conversation unfolds, the residents express strong but different views about economic benefits, environmental impact, and long-term community effects. The discussion becomes tense at times, but people are still listening and responding to each other. And multiple perspectives are present, and no single group dominates the conversation entirely. So, what do we think? Could a group dialogue, like a council meeting or something, help, or would something else be needed first before doing that? Seems like it's working. Depends on whether everyone has a vote. Yeah, that's interesting. And that's great. Yes, dialogue include reps for data center. That was going to kind of be my next question. So if so, who would we think would need to be a part of this conversation in order for it to be productive and move forward? Yes, to management, data management involvement. Yeah. Reps for data center, absolutely. Additional stakeholders needed. Residents, yeah. Developer, local, yeah. Absolutely. It kind of helps to kind of think about who's affected by this decision, who has that kind of decision making power to kind of give that stamp of approval, and then who's needed to, or if anyone's needed to keep the conversation constructive and make sure that's happening. It's kind of interesting to me to think about like who would be invited to these conversations because you just think about all the different facets of people that would be affected by especially when it's like community decisions like this.
It might be also interesting to think about space, in terms
Right.
of the microphone. Who has, if the microphone were an apple pie, how many slices should each member get in terms of being able to voice their feelings? I think we often see that with town halls where people are like, I have 2 minutes, so I'm going to just try to get this out while I can. um,
I think that's why Julie's comment what is so interesting. It depends on whether everyone has a vote. It brings kind of space into that other light. Yeah. So far we've kind of worked with some structured scenarios. We're going to shift next we're going to shift into our applied practice. We're going to work with real life situations. I'm going to ask for some calls on some experiences from you all, and we're going to work through them together. So just asking that you reflect on a time that you might have felt stuck, tense, unproductive in a conversation, or like or in a scenario where maybe you were dealing with a situation at hand and having a group conversation like this, and maybe thinking through that process of who should we invite and would it be productive, and but maybe that didn't happen. So I encourage you to reflect on a time through that and kind of carry that through with you as we're doing this applied practice. And we'll use a few of these short scenarios later in a few slides. So think of one that you might be willing to share. So yeah, if you could just think of a time when you've had a group conversation that might have felt tense or unproductive, or where people talked but didn't seem to be understanding each other, or the conversation didn't happen but might have could used one. If you need to jot down a few words that might be helpful just to kind of stick with you. And then it doesn't need to be too personal, just do something comfortable and then we can adapt it. Or if you don't have anything, we can also like adapt it from one of the earlier scenarios. I would just love to hear from you guys as we go through this.
yeah. And just also a disclaimer, it doesn't have to be a situation that you were directly involved in. It could be one you witnessed going on, or, something that's been happening in your family, but, doesn't really involve you, you know. So just want to put that out there too. It doesn't have to be close at hand for you.
And then for each situation that we'll work through the 3 steps. So kind of what's happening, heat, direction, and space. And then identifying and narrowing it down to what mattered most out of those 3. What was the focus to shape it? Um, And then what move could what might have helped, what move could someone have made, or was something else needed in order to do that?
So I'll go if nobody else wants to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
I
we'd
love
love
that.
to hear. Love
Yeah.
to hear.
All right, I'm gonna disguise this one a little bit, but and make up a little bit to make it maybe more interesting. But so I was involved in a conversation with the group I'm part of about collaborating with another group to work on joint projects. And we had done some prep work. We'd even done some written proposal back and forth. But when it came to the conversation, we didn't get very far because um, one party just kind of stopped the whole thing by not rejecting the projects, but sort of rejecting some of the approach and principles of the other group. And I found myself later, well, much later, thinking we didn't really probe that much.
Mm,
The one got kind of defensive and offended, and that kind of ended that.
mm,
So we were stuck, and that was the end of it.
mm,
So the only thing I can think of would have been to try and dig a little deeper
mm.
into what the objection was.
Yeah, what
Mm.
did you make of that experience?
Um, I don't want to say.
That's fair. That's fair.
Um, it was disappointing and frustrating and offensive.
Yeah. And when things like that are happening and you're interpreting it,
Right.
it's, heat is building. That's like a moment of, that's the pressure cooker right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is tough. D
Yeah.
Not to make this, one directional here. I'm curious if anyone had any thoughts about um, how they might approach the situation Kathy brought up. So trying to work on a joint project and seeing that some of the core agreements are sort of not being shared or
Mhm.
being looked at sort of differently.
Yeah. Some of the core purposes, even.
Hmm, gotcha.
So there is someone on here who might be able to add to this if they wanted to. But
Ah, interesting. Yeah, Julie mentioned so revisit the core agreements and don't move forward without those agreements. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can sort of inoculate a future conflict or disagreement.
Yeah. I
And
agree
you're,
further conversation was needed, but we
yeah,
didn't do it.
yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I think that could be one of those examples of reorienting where it's like, I thought this conversation was something else, but it's being revealed to me that this is the front part of a later conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
it kind of reminds
It's
me of like,
good.
you find yourself in a different room than you thought you were in.
Right.
Well, thank you, Lisa. We're grateful to have you as well. Thank you. Oh, interesting. Stephanie mentioned a mission statement for the meeting.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, that could be a really great suggestion too.
It might have revealed the disagreement in advance.
Hmm. Yeah, right.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. That's interesting. Kind of.
Yeah. So we'd have a chance to think about it.
Hmm. Right. It's interesting how much that word values can affect dialogue. That's really what we're kind of doing in group dialogue. We're sort of negotiating our values with each other. Um, and that can be a challenge too, because sometimes I think in certain dialogues, people want space for their values and they're very, they hold their values dear. And it can be hard to open that space up to, different perspectives. You know, we've seen that in a group dialogue we had surrounding book banning, and that was a real challenge to have these two groups of people who had just different values around any of this kind of social justice hot button items of the day.
Hmm.
Um, but again, almost that move of reorienting that we mentioned about it with the girl with the bathing suit, is like we both care about the kid, right? Or we both care about, this one, we both have a value of like promoting human flourishing in whatever iteration that might take in our community. So there is that commonly shared direction there that we could reorient to. Um, I'm curious, do you feel like maybe space was involved in your situation at all, Kathy? Like maybe was it just, equally voiced and just not heard, or did you feel like maybe there was something left out?
Um, could you ask that again?
Yeah, we've talked about heat and we've sort of talked about the direction of where things were going in relation to values. But I guess I'm curious also about space. And do you feel like there was, kind of an equal distribution of sharing there, or did
Hmm.
did it feel like
Um,
maybe there was some voices that weren't heard, or maybe rather than voices that were heard, voices that felt um, given equal equal value in the conversation?
um, I I think we all felt like we could speak, but the one side seemed quite dug in. So, um, I mean, further conversation would have been helpful, but it was hard to figure out how to do it
Yeah.
um, without getting defensive. And it felt like at some point, to me, it almost felt like a power thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think it totally does. Thank you for sharing that. Stephanie, you brought something up in the chat just now. Would you like to share that out loud with us or stay in the chat? It's up to you. I can read the scenario. Oh, she's at a library. Okay. I'll do some of the talking for you then, if that's all right. Um, so Stephanie mentioned, I'm thinking of a community meeting that was held in my city, also Allen City. Yes, we have some representation from, what is it, Davis, California, a few years ago, where it devolved into two factions that were shouting at each other. Interesting. Has anyone witnessed a situation similar to that in their community? Yeah, well, one of the noticeable things there would, yeah, great. Probably it was needed that someone disallow any shouting. Great.
Mhm.
Yeah, that kind of brings back to those ground rules that we might have, or yeah, that agreement. Yeah, interesting. Julie brought up moderating so that one person speaks at a time. Yeah, so you're establishing like a sort of container, you know? It's like what kind of discussion could actually take place in the petri dish of what we're setting up here? That's a really great suggestion. Yeah, yeah. Lewis brought up, as you shared, setting the ground rules in the beginning. Yeah, it's such a big structural difference it can make.
I think I was thinking that with like the mission statement for the meeting suggestion as well. I think sometimes like setting up those predetermined either rules or mission or goal or outcome can sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, and so obviously that's one where heat is obviously, bubbling up and sort of spilling over. As Haley mentioned, that's one of those indicators that heat is involved, right? Raising voices and that's one way you could read that situation. Interesting. Haley, I'll pass you the talking stick about Kathy's comment. So I feel like I've been taking on the talking stick here.
Been in meetings where the person speaking held the ball or other. That's exactly what I was thinking whenever they had mentioned the moderating. I was like a talking stick where interruption wasn't allowed. Sometimes that can be like a clear cut way to, no questions asked. This person can talk.
Yeah, Julie, great suggestion. If you don't mind me asking, you've mentioned circle process, so I'm just kind of curious, like if you would be willing to share what that looks like and how you've seen that play out in the past. Either if you've seen it in the past or
So
what you might suspect it could do.
I've seen it and experienced it being done where essentially you have group agreement, and as the other person mentioned, you don't um, you don't respond to each other. You go around and talk without interruption, so everyone feels heard, and then go around again so
Hmm.
that people can react. So it can be really productive from the standpoint that people have no choice but to listen.
Hmm.
So they can't and they don't know by the time it's to them what the conversation will be. So
Mm,
um that habit of pre-practicing how am I going to respond is not as useful in situations like that because
mm,
you're not actually reacting to the person who just spoke. You're
mm,
talking about whatever topic it happens to be and discussing your viewpoint or laying out your viewpoint. So it just makes it regulates the heat really well, right? Because you're not getting into a back and forth kind of a conversation where you're arguing with each other,
mm,
or talking about somebody else's values. And one of the agreements that you usually have is no one's there to judge each other.
mhm.
We're there to share information and having those rules in advance, although it can be tedious for some people, it getting some people to agree to rules in advance it just doesn't happen, right? They'd rather not have a discussion if they had to talk about it beforehand. But if you can get those agreements, it's really helpful in having a productive discussion.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And I love how, the process of everyone having that equal opportunity to, have the microphone in their hand or the talking stick as they go around. Yeah, and Kathy mentioned that, she especially loves how there's the second time. So that is great. Yeah, and Lewis chimed in as well, giving opportunity to each at the time they have the talking stick in their hand. So it's sort of this leveling opportunity that everyone has that opportunity to speak.
I am curious, one of the comments in the chat indicate, that it's harder to do this in a virtual setting, and the stick idea or the ball idea. So are there any ways that you guys can think of in a virtual setting to kind of ensure that everyone is not, since you take away that ability to hand off the baton, kind of?
I do circles virtually every month, and one of the things that really helps is having a circle order.
Okay.
So just someone establishing these are the names, we're going to go in this order so that it doesn't become oh, when do we start? Unless you have a group that's really been around each other for a long time, then maybe popcorn works. But otherwise, having a just somebody designating or just the person to the right of you is the person, actually that doesn't work virtually, excuse me.
That's great. Yeah. I didn't even think about like an order.
That's great. Yeah, that's such a great idea. Yeah, so a common theme I'm seeing here among everyone is, that there's these structural things. Like Lewis said, it's the introduction and relating the rules in the process. And yeah, it's just interesting how much, setting those terms can affect things. Yeah, committing together, that shared commitment Julie mentioned. So what I like about what everyone has presented, here is that like there's some front work that can happen around a dialogue. There's that, here's the rules, here's what we're after, here's what we're all agreeing to, we're going to share that agreement. So that's like, before the dialogue happens, these are the sort of, you know, orientation essentially. And then, if you need to reorient later, you can. Oh, great. Great question, Lauren. What are good ways to rephrase bringing attention back to the shared agreements, redirecting without offending while doing that? That's a great question. Does anyone have any thoughts about how they might approach that challenge? Feel free to share that in the chat or out loud. Okay, yeah, how to phrase that.
Yes, I, this is Lewis. I was going to say that what is important that there's that greater understanding in the beginning, and then the facilitator or the mediator reframing or rephrasing what is being said, and then trying to get direction to the people who are in the room to recognize and show an understanding of what the other person is saying. So when everybody has an understanding, they can move on to the next step.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and it makes it so much easier to call back to that later. That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Lewis. Yeah. Having that mutual understanding is so integral to having a productive and constructive dialogue. Yeah, maybe a simple reminder. And, okay, yeah, Lauren, I'll help answer that question a bit for you too. Is, some ways that if you haven't, I'm just thinking about situations where you find yourself in a dialogue, you haven't done the best practice of setting up an agreement in advance. A way that you could kind of rephrase that might be, hey, I was feeling when we got into the conversation that, we were going to reach a consensus, or we were going to make a decision out of this conversation, but it's looking like maybe we just need to talk about this other thing first. So maybe we should just do that. I guess the example I'm providing is like, a lot of times in on teams or in um, community settings, there's a policy that's being proposed, and let's all vote on it and figure out what we're going to do. What's the directional uh, decision we're gonna move towards? It might be helpful to just sort of acknowledge that that might have been the goal, but maybe we just have to get back to that after we do this other thing first. Yeah. Julie mentioned reminding someone of the particular rule that they aren't following. I feel like that statement is not consistent with what we agreed to. Can you restate that? Yeah, that's a wonderful example. It's being able to pull from that previous understanding there. And restating that is a great suggestion. Just to kind of build off of what Julie's mentioning is that um, providing someone a do-over, right? When the conversation's getting really tense and hot, and there's a lot of heat in the experience, and you're feeling sort of offended, or you feel sort of offended either for yourself or for someone else, a good opportunity can be like, hey, could you just try saying that a different way? And it might help neutralize some of that. Um, because it might be just a situation where the situation's kind of tense. Someone said something that they, in a way, they weren't really like super happy with themselves. Um, that can be helpful as long as you're conscious of people who, could be damaged by what they're talking about. I did want to just bring up one more thing from the chat. Oh, great. Baman mentioned former coworker would regularly use "could you say more," um, which works to get more clarity, but also let the speaker reframe it if needed. Yeah, that's such a great example.
I
Thank you
love
for
that tool.
sharing that.
Yes.
Sure thing, Kathy. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're grateful to have you.
Bye, all.
Take care, Kathy. Thank you. I also just wanted to mention a comment that Stephanie made where she said, "Can't think of a specific example now, but my own general experience with group discussions is that I don't get to speak because others are louder and talk faster, and if I even try to speak, I talk too slowly and immediately am interrupted." And Stephanie also brought up being in adult mode from transactional analysis. I'm not familiar with that. Is anyone else familiar with that who'd like to share what that's about? Maybe someone who's not in a library. But that might be a good extended resource for us to share with you all in our follow-up message. Yeah, great. Yeah, having a facilitator can be really helpful to stop that dynamic and letting you complete your thought. Great. Julie, as far as facilitators go, if you don't mind me asking, it just sounds like you might be familiar with dialogue processes since you do circle groups. Do you have a certain um, way that you might select a facilitator or certain qualities a facilitator might have that you would lean into?
I think the ability to lead and excuse me, not lead, have a listening ear and patience is really important to model that kind of behavior and make it a welcoming space and start with the welcome and introducing everyone in a way that makes everyone feel comfortable as if their voice matters. I think is a really nice way to get people in the mode to have the dialogue and to agree because you're really if the person doesn't allow the individuals in the dialogue to speak at some point, some people never will speak, so having somebody who's willing to keep track of that or able to keep track of that, I think is really helpful too, because then each participant feels like they're being looked after.
Yeah.
This is
Thank you.
Alan. I'd like to add to what Julie said is in the preface of what the facilitator says before the conversations is to talk about their role
Mm,
and to introduce the idea of ground rules if that hasn't already been said, and that
mm,
their role is to help people to communicate within the bounds of the ground rules and to make sure everyone has a chance to speak.
mm. Thank you for sharing that, Ellen. Yeah, the facilitator can play a crucial role in that way.
I think that that with respect to the examples you've given this evening too, that somebody needs to be prepared to redirect and to bring the discussion, you know, down a notch and that kind of thing. And if you don't have a facilitator, somebody's got to take that initiative
Mhm.
within the group. And then you're changing the dynamic. That's the nice thing about the circle is you eliminate that power dynamic. You don't put one person in the space of having to moderate everything.
Mm. Super interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Well, wonderful. So, as we wrap up, notice what just happened. We took some real situations, we slowed them down and worked through it step by step. And so that's the skill. And out of our conversation tonight, we also generated some other strategies we can use. Um, so, you don't have to control the whole conversation. And remember, sometimes what you do might not change the conversation, all that much. And that's okay. We are limited in what we're capable of changing in a dialogue sometimes. And that's just part of it. Um, So just wanted to create some space. Is there any questions that are still permeating for anyone? What would be helpful to talk through before we close, or do you feel like you have a pretty good handle on this? I mean, we did just talk things out, but if you have a question that you want to pass to the group or, something that you're personally still kind of unsure about, um, you know, this would be a good time to bring that up. Um,
I work in government, and I'd be curious to hear people's approaches to dealing with that power dynamic where one person who's saying something, everyone in the room knows that, that person has power that they don't have.
mm,
Um, are there techniques people have used um, to even that playing field somehow? Or yeah, that's my question.
yeah, it's a great question. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? That is a tough one. Yeah, that's a good observation, Stephanie. That is a tough one. Navigating power is a real challenge, um, especially when there's like, tangible human costs on the line, Sometimes it's people's survival that they're having to negotiate with when there's a power imbalance. I will mention we have some strategies in our some of our workplace materials. We talk about this. some of that can be boundary setting. Sometimes where there's um, you know, mis like misaligned expectations. Communicating, hey, I'm happy to do uh, the three things you just assigned me, but unfortunately, the scope of work that I currently have on my plate would require that I have to, shift one other thing. Um, and another good way to sort of navigate through power can be curiosity, um, which kind of helps diffuse that oppositionality. When someone who's in a different power position um, has that, you know, dominion over the conversation, a good way to sort of neutralize it a bit is to take a bit of a stance of curiosity. How, you know, interesting. Okay, so what was that policy like? What is that policy like seeking to establish for our workplace or something like that? Can often be a good lead into a later conversation. Great. Thank you, Lewis. Thanks so much. All right. So we're going to move into our key takeaways. Really just to run through it quickly is to read the moment. And, we all did a great job of that tonight. Choose what matters most and make one useful move that you can take that would be consequential in the moment. It may not shift and change everything, um, but it's very useful. So next, think about how you might apply this in your community. Consider your workplace, your civic environment, your social groups that you're part of, maybe your faith-based community, and any networks that you're involved in. Julie mentioned government. So those are really good questions to navigate. And Julie, I do want to mention that we'll do our best to share some of those workplace resources with you, which kind of do carry some of the qualities around government as well. Um, but please, for anyone attending tonight, feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. We're happy to talk through some of that with you. Um, And you don't have to do this stuff alone. So we're always here to support each other and really grateful to you all being here together tonight. That being said, before we move into ways to stay connected with us, I just wanted to share a survey, for this event tonight. It's an opportunity for us to hear from you and a way to just know, how this landed for everybody. So if you would be so kind to fill that out and just share a little bit about your experience, we're eager to hear from you. Um, and we look forward to connecting. Some other ways you might connect with us is by signing up for our email, um, you know, working to hear about what we're up to. We're happy to share that with you. Um, Stay connected with us on social media. Feel free to promote our posts or events of this nature. And for faith, people of faith, feel free to pray or meditate. Teach these to your spiritual community. Also, volunteer if you'd love to lead a session like this or lead a peace circle with us. We would love to have that collaboration with potential volunteers. So please do reach out, and we will also be reaching out to you as well. So that's available. And also consider starting a peace project like we have done in Calvert County. That's a great opportunity to bring peace into your own world. Also, a way that you can support us is by giving. We just want to note that as something, that helps us as an organization, and builds our capacity. So we appreciate your contributions to help us keep events like this going. And we also want to thank our great sponsors and partners, Broadview Church and the Calvert Peace Project, for their partnership and leadership. Their commitment to community peace building makes events like this possible. And so here's our contact information. If you have any questions or want to support putting these skills into practice or exploring next steps, we're here for you. And if you remember one thing from tonight, remember this: notice what's happening, decide what matters most, and make one useful move. So thank you for spending your evening with us, everybody. And we're so grateful to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everybody. All right, everyone. I think we're going to close out tonight. Thanks so much. And we will be in touch with a follow-up email. And we look forward to connecting with you in our next virtual event. And, always open to volunteers or any types of collaborations you might have in mind. So thanks so much. And have a great night, everyone. Thank you. All right. Take care.